Obviously it's late, so we'll keep this pretty casual and pretty fun for this moderated panel. If we could just go around the room, maybe starting on the end over there, and maybe if you want to just say a couple words about yourself, introduce your project as well, I think that would be a good way to kick off.
All right, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here. I'm Sean, Deputy Cyborg at MentorX. So you may ask, what is MentorX? You can think of MentorX as Mentor's AI research and incubation arm, where we create sandbox for AI-driven experiments. So at MentorX, we are focused on showcasing what it really means to weave AI into an organization across different areas such as fund management, treasury management, community and social, on-chain research, and creative. Some of the things that we also focus on is that we aim to drive engagement and education of AI across the Mentor ecosystem, drive thought leadership externally, and last but not least, co-build and advise some of the top AI teams building in the space.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael, co-founder and CEO of Zero G, and it's nice to see that we at least have an audience. I know at ETH Dubai there were 0 people, so very nice. You weathered the heat.
Michael, does that make them eligible for airdrop, or?
I can't comment on airdrops.
Okay.
We can only legally say there will be rewards.
Okay,
that's about it.
Got it. That's good to hear.
There will be rewards, maybe. Anyways, nice to connect with everyone here. And at Zero G, if you haven't heard of us, we're the largest AI layer 1 ecosystem. We've built a complete stack where you can build fully on-chain AI applications. We've got an infinitely scalable layer 1. We have a compute network that currently can do inference and very soon fine-tuning as well. And then we're working on training, but that's very much a research problem. Storage, we have a storage layer. We've got a data availability layer as well that's then powering the layer 1 as well. And finally, a service marketplace, which is our version of the App Store where anybody can register. So for example, we work with Aether as a GPU provider. They can register the network, and then you can utilize and get paid through that service marketplace. So all in one-stop shop on-chain AI.
Awesome. I'm Eshan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lumino AI, and we're building decentralized training and inference infrastructure. But we specifically focus on the machine learning software infrastructure as opposed to some of like the compute infrastructure. So we figure out how to make it easy for people to fine-tune, deploy models, and then look at things like how do we increase the tokens per second on the model layer, or increase or decrease like the dollars per token required to cut costs on inference, fine-tuning, training, and pre-training.
Thanks, guys. Quick background on me. I'm a full-time moderator, but part-time the co-founder of Camp Network as well, building the autonomous IP layer. Our thesis is in the 3 armies of AI: model, compute, and IP. IP accrues the most value, and so fundamentally we are having users onboard their data on-chain, tokenize and license this such that they can fine-tune and deploy agents around this, and then democratize this such that anybody whose data is actually used for training receives royalties that we believe they deserve. But more importantly, to dig into this panel, I see a lot of things over here. We've got Lumino on the training and inference. We've got Zero G, which kind of handles full stack. And then Cyborg, which it sort of seems is like going to live on the app layer mostly. I guess maybe we'll start with Eshan on the decentralized training and inference stack. Today everything that sort of succeeded has been on the centralized side. You've seen a lot of the big tech conglomerates. When they have balance sheets and war chests that big, why do you think decentralization will be able to compete with them when it comes to actual effectiveness on the inference side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is that, compute, even though the hyperscaler should have access to compute at the lowest price in the world, the price that they end up charging the customer, especially on an on-demand basis, is significantly higher than, the private cloud or the private network, right? So the first basis is always price. Second basis is user experience. So, for let's say like the last decade, DevOps is still a big thing, but the amount of DevOps engineers needed per engineer, software engineer, used to be a lot higher in 2010 than it is today, and a lot of it is because of advancements in automation and tooling around DevOps. And so we kind of think through the same thing as like AI is going to become ubiquitous. Everyone is going to want to build a model, train a model, fine-tune a model, et cetera, deploy it. And so how do we make it really easy for people to actually do that. And so, the way that we kind of see ourselves is like we've built an SDK that allows you to do these things, and the back end is a decentralized network, and if you don't care about the decentralized network, you don't even need to know that we're running on a decentralized network. And if you do, the big thing that we really care about is verification. So like verification of training, verification of inference, these cryptographic proofs that prove that the model was trained in the way that was supposed to, and same thing on inference, like proof of inference, the model acted or thought the way that it was supposed to. So like that's kind of our focus on the value that we provide. It comes down to basically cost, user experience, and verifiability.
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of really good points there. Attestations obviously is something that everybody seems to be really focused on. The big thing I'd like to dive into here is cost, and it might be a perfect segue to turn it over to Michael over here, but you've seen a lot of these what I call like off-chain storage plays, AWS, GCP, and Azure traditionally work really well, but obviously, they're raking 40 to 50% margins on this, which has been the whole thesis around why decentralized storage could be cheaper in the first place. The big question then is, people tend to work on those off-chain storage solutions mostly because of the DevX around it. You're wrapping 14, 15 products on it, and because the DevX is so good, you're sort of seeing the margin come into play over there. One of the things at 0G, obviously it's on the storage side as well as everything else you mentioned, but how do you sort of see that fitting in and really taking some market share away from them in an obviously pretty established industry?
Yeah, purely on the cost side, actually, to give you a sense of the margin, it's actually much larger than that. So when we talk to storage providers that are providing certain things, whether it's in a data center or at home, they can deal with $3 per terabyte per month and be still highly profitable. Amazon charges 22 per terabyte per month for HDD storage. So that's their margin, essentially, if you think about that. So why should you end up paying that margin? Well, as you said, DevX is a good experience. It's bundled with EC2 and a bunch of compute, and it's very flexible. You can have Glacier storage and so on, but most people also forget about the ingress and egress costs as well of that. They look at the pure number, and it says, oh, this looks pretty good. It's not that expensive. I don't have that much data. And then you get a huge bill because you're like, oh, wait, I had to transfer all this data out many times. And so there's some costs that are also hidden as part of these bills. So that's a quick answer to the price thing. But then if you zoom out a little bit, like what's the second biggest cost on tech companies and other companies' income sheet generally is after humans. After humans, it's AWS or cloud bills, basically. So how can we decrease these cloud bills so that new business models can become possible in the future? And so that's where we come into play on all parts of the stack, whether it's compute, whether it's the execution layer, whether it's the storage layer, and make that up to 80% less costly. And so I think that gives us a competitive advantage in competing against kind of centralized solutions, just purely on the cost side. But then there's various other components that also make this very attractive. So, for example, if AWS at one day wakes up and says, hey, your model isn't meeting our terms of service, it's directly competing with ours, you can no longer host this here, I'm sorry. You just got censored, essentially. In a decentralized system, that can't happen. You cannot get censored, but because by definition it's already decentralized. It's on multiple storage providers. So there's an inbuilt benefit as part of that censorship resistance. And then finally, you also have disaster recovery built in right away. If you forget to do a backup, for example, on S3, you lose the data. Too bad. And so if you have multiple fragments across the network, you have that built in as well. So that's just, there's many hosts of benefits there. And of course, I could go on the compute side as well, but I'll stop there for now.
No, I mean, I think it makes total sense. You hit it on the head with the price. Candidly, how expensive some of these cloud bills are a hindrance to a lot of the startup business models that we've seen. I think you mentioned it where it's sort of, it's almost spinning up your own cloud is something that we see as a huge value accretion when it comes to tech unlock. But the point that I'd love to dive into there is sort of censorship. And we'll pass it on to Cyborg over here. When you first saw sort of AI business models, let alone in the decentralized way, but also in the Web 2 way, everything that came out was just like, oh, we're an agent for X, Y, and Z, but they're all fundamentally just GPT wrappers at the end of the day. And so as you guys are sort of thinking about incubating new ideas at Mantle, I imagine it lives more on the application layer. How do you go about balancing what I call like accurate models which people actually want to use, along with some of these decentralized plays where there's no censorship resistance, but the accuracy of the models maintains something to be seen. So would love to turn it over to you on that.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just touch on a little bit about some of the other stuff that you guys were talking about as well. I think one of the reasons why we need decentralization for AI is first availability, second security, and third with the rise of DeepIn is also about everyone can contribute to the network, right? So availability really targets like censorship resistance, uptime, and all of that. When you have AI, essentially it can run like 24/7, right? That's essentially what it does, like in terms of automation, efficiency, and being everything everywhere all at once. But just a couple of weeks ago, I think there was an AWS outage as well, and a lot of like crypto providers, SEXs, DEX were all down, right? And that is a very true problem in people, talking about it, but not essentially walking the talk. Second is security. When it comes to like a lot of like data, I think data forms the backbone of all intelligent operations. We talk about agents, there's a lot of data that's involved, right? Without data, your agents is not able to process and is not able to kind of like execute transactions intelligently as well. And the last but not least is DeepIn. That kind of like alludes me to the next point as well in terms of things that people won't want to use and in terms of accuracy of model as well. I think one of the things that's very interesting is actually there's a huge lack of originality and innovation currently in the space, even for AI. What we want to look out for and support more teams are actually more teams that are building more sophisticated use cases or novel overlaps of AI in something. So we don't see AI as a vertical, but more of a horizontal. So one of the more interesting one is actually the overlap between DeepIn and AI. With DeepIn, it's essentially like a SaaS economy, right? It's kind of like the crypto version of Uber or Airbnb, where you can tokenize assets and there's a marketplace for it, but there's still a lot of like idle resources even after tokenizing it. So with AI, you can talk about like what is the intelligent matchmaking of these resources in demand and supply side, or in terms of like buy and purchase as well. So a lot of like DeepIn, they tokenize like energy, data, GPU and all of that, but it's still a very like idle market because it's not intelligently reaching out to the proper buyers and sellers of it.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think you hit on a lot of the themes that everybody really focuses on, data and security being the top two. But I guess I'll open this question up for the panel. Data and AI like AI and crypto started to take sort of flight about a year and a half ago. And originally, there were a lot of these theses that you mentioned. Yeah, it probably all started with intents in the first place in about Q2, Q3, 2023 in the first, or 2024 in the first place. But, when I think about it, if you look at what AI has actually reached what I call mainstream adoption on the decentralized mechanism to date, virtuals is probably the best example, which is basically just like meme coins attached to off-chain agents, or you could argue that like virtuals token was used to pay for inference and whatnot. But, we really haven't seen the takeoff that everybody's sort of initially expected, especially when you look at some of those big funding rounds from last year or a year and 3 months ago. I'd make this question two parts, and I'll open it up to anybody, whoever wants to start it off. Number one is, why do we think that decentralized AI hasn't taken off yet, especially when we've seen the rest of the AI industry in Web2 grow dramatically from, GPT-1 to O4 in 18 months or so? And the second part of that question is, from a KPIs perspective or from a usability perspective, outside of some of the inference plays that I know you guys are, some of the infrastructure plays that you guys are focused on, what does real mainstream adoption look like at the intersection of Web3 and AI?
Go ahead.
Maybe we can have Eshan start with the first part and then Michael start with the second part and banter off.
So I'll change this just a little bit for us. Like when we talk to Web2 and Web3 developers about like how they're using AI, right? They're actually the same use cases. I mean, there's a crypto component to Web3 that exists, but there are a lot of teams that we talk to. They're like, hey, we want to fine tune a model where we might be like streaming data from Farcaster, for example, but they want to do some sort of use an LLM on that data and gain some insights. And so how we kind of push this is like we're actually building like an AI business and a crypto business at the same time, and like the AI business is kind of decoupled from the crypto business. And when I say that, I mean we're trying to build the best developer tool or developer tools and user experience for people to just kind of be able to fine tune and deploy LLMs and use them in a production grade environment. And then on the back end, that production grade environment, instead of being on a centralized network, is on a decentralized network. And it's not necessarily, we're not necessarily thinking about like, distributed training or distributed inference over decentralized nodes, but maybe the compute infrastructure is centralized, but the infrastructure providers are decentralized.
I fully agree on the latter part of that. And then,
so when it comes to that, I don't necessarily believe that, crypto and AI hasn't taken off. I just think that, when people talk about crypto and AI, they talk about like specifically agents on blockchain trading and making on-chain decisions. And I think that's just one part of like a lot of the stuff that's happening in AI and Web3 companies. And, that's the part that I would assume would take longer, just because people are naturally hesitant toward giving agents a lot of autonomous power right now.
Yeah, and really quickly I'll respond and then turn it over to Michael to sort of hit on that piece as well. But you mentioned sort of the Farcaster and training LLMs. One of the reasons why the off-chain, or like let's just call it the Web2 agents have been so successful is because the training data sets are way better. It's like Reddit, it's Twitter, where people actually spend time. From a macro perspective, is there enough data on Farcaster to actually train an agent in a successful manner? And that could be one of the reasons why we haven't seen huge agents on chain yet is, do people really care what perp stacks you're trading on or what NFTs you own when you think about broader user behavior? But I'll turn it over to Michael. I know he was going to say something earlier.
Yeah, I'll put this into the bigger context of mass adoption. So a simple answer would be to say like, oh, well, 1 billion people in centralized or closed AI are utilizing these technologies. So therefore, mass adoption in Web3 means 1 billion users have to use Web3 AI. I actually don't think that that's quite the right way to think about it. So the way we think about it is, why would you even use decentralized AI? What type of use cases actually make sense to put in a decentralized context? And so our whole perspective is that they need to be mission critical, societal level applications. That's when it really matters. Do you need to use a decentralized AI when you're ordering a pizza from a restaurant, for example, via AI agent? Not really. Like, why do you need to verify it? Like, do you care if it came from a ChatGPT 3.5 or 4.5 model? No, it's like a simple pizza order. Maybe it gets your pizza order slightly incorrect. Like, it ordered, I don't know, pineapple instead of some other vegetable or so on. So that could be the worst extent that happens. Or maybe it ordered 2 pizzas instead of 1. So sure, there's some ramifications, but it's not the same as if you have a bunch of humanoid robots running around in a city picking up trash or running manufacturing plants and so on. At that level, imagine somebody spoofing the inference request or actually hijacking the system where all of a sudden you have an entire army at your disposal of these humanoid robots. That's where it really matters to have decentralized AI, because you want to know what's under the hood. You want to be able to verify what went into these models that are running these systems. Where did the data come from? Who labeled the data? Who made the kind of censorship decisions as part of the model? Where is the model even hosted? What type of inference requests are you getting? What type of GPUs are you using? Because having the wrong model or the inference request being spoofed could actually mean the difference between life and death in these types of scenarios. So that's where it's absolutely critical on that spectrum from individual to societal level to utilize decentralized AI. So to me, mass adoption looks like Web3 AI is used first and foremost for these massive societal level applications. And that may not be 1 billion users, maybe that's in the millions of users or tens of millions of users, but that's where it really, really matters initially. And then maybe later there's other benefits like, hey, it's 100x cheaper, or in the case of DeepSeek, I think it's like 1500x cheaper than OpenAI. So then maybe there's another compelling use case to then also start using it for individual type of use cases. And so maybe slowly we edge into that direction.
Yeah, I think, obviously, go ahead, Cyborg, and then I'll sort of close it up.
Yeah, so just to kind of add on to that as well, I think there's 2 parts to the question, right? First is why is decentralized AI not taking off, and second is what is true mainstream adoption. So I think one of the reasons is, as I've said earlier, there's not much originality or innovation in terms of the consumer-facing applications. And when you talk about even the language model, a lot of it has been oh yeah, it's a wrapper of LLMs. Where are the reinforcement learning models, right? There are a lot of things that LLMs are unable to do in terms of sports, right? You can't get an agent to learn or master AlphaGo or chess with LLM. It's by reinforcement learning models. There's not enough builders talking about OCR or computer vision. I think there's a lot of people that just jump on the bandwagon. That's one thing. Second thing is also about user experience. When you look at Deep AI, it's like NLP chat interface, right? And it's like typing text to on-chain action. When you talk about like all the crypto savvy folks, like would you rather press the button yourself or would you like type in the command? I think a lot of us would rather press the button ourselves, right? Because it's just not a very natural kind of process. So I would like to see a lot more of like this interface or this modality from like, instead of like text or something, maybe voice powered. Because all of the agents in our traditional life as well, when you look at like Alexa, when you look at Siri, all of these are voice powered, right? And what does true adoption look like? I want to talk about mainstream adoption, but true adoption is like, in the last couple of weeks, I had multiple conversations with people using ChatGPT as their personal therapist, whether using it for workplace challenges or relationship challenges. True adoption happens subtly. True adoption happens when your user base discovers a byproduct use case that is not a top 10 use case that you built the product for, and that's ChatGPT being used as a personal therapist.
Makes total sense. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to our panelists for a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thanks.